Welcome everyone to the first episode of the Fika podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Ryan Lee. Alongside me are Kevin Ma and Joshua Wong. And today we're very honored to invite Mr. Kevin Wong, the CEO of Origami Labs, to join us at this podcast. Joshua will give a more detailed introduction of Mr. Kevin Wong.
Thank you, Ryan. Kevin is the co-founder and CEO of Origami Labs. As mentioned, one of their greatest products would be the Orii smart ring. The Orii smart ring is actually a power device which uses bone conduction in order to turn your hand into a listening device, which would be a very great communication device. So one example of how it works would actually be that as you put the Orii ring on your finger, you actually put the finger right behind your ear in order for the vibrations made from the special ring to conduct these vibrations into your inner ear bones in order for you to listen to special kinds of sounds, which could be the voices while you're having phone calls. It is a very new technology, and I think that is very innovative.
Right. So let's start with the question first. So what's your story? How did you create Orii, and what's your motivation behind creating such a device?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we're asked to create a very clear storyline on why we created things, but in today's more nonchalant conversation, I think why we start things is always very complicated. So I think there's that sort of higher level outside stuff that a lot of people know. So I think from a core motivation perspective, we originally wanted to create something for my dad, who's visually impaired. So he's been visually impaired since 13, and specific pain point that we were trying to address was to allow visually impaired people to be able to use smartphones in a more sort of easy to use, the technical term is accessible way. So porting certain features, creating a wearable that ended up being a ring that allowed you to basically get a lot of easy access to certain features in the phone through sort of voice control and through a touch of the ear. And that's sort of like the clean motivation. But I think the interesting thing is that you don't really understand that until significantly further into the process. I think another really important thing that I also started to learn was there are a lot of personal motivations as well, which is the desire to create something, right? So if you can think of that as the product, as if you're giving an analogy, it's like the dish that you make, then the other is the love to cook. So I think the desire to be an entrepreneur, to want to create something, to want to do something myself, to sort of build a team, to have the freedom to contribute something creatively to the world. I think that's another very important motivational factor on sort of why I started this journey on sort of creating this really crazy accessibility product.
Well, are there any reasons behind choosing a ring? Maybe you could have chosen like a glove, or some maybe like headphones inside your ear. So why a ring?
Yeah, so there are a lot of design considerations. So actually, we are already working on a second generation product that is in stealth. So that is not a ring. So it's quite interesting. So I think the ring was a very interesting choice that had its strengths and its weaknesses. So the core thinking behind the ring was, one is that we wanted a device that could be on you all day. So this concept of a wearable is very important. So I think for someone like my dad, it didn't make any sense to have, or you couldn't actually wear a headphone all day. Also another very important part that we were trying to tackle was making sure that we weren't blocking the ears. So having something block your ears actually limits one of the more important senses for a visually impaired person. And then the third and probably the most subtle reason is we wanted to have something that was very readily accessible, but socially acceptable. Which is, if you don't have something in your ear, it could be anything, right? It could be something you put in your pocket or something. but sort of having it on the hand made it convenient enough that you could use it all the time. There are actually a lot of core weaknesses that we discovered as the product started to launch and we started to sell globally and we had more users use the product. And that's sort of what helped us develop the second versions of the product.
Well, were there any limitations to the ring that when you tried to manufacture the ring that you came across?
Yeah, so I mean, there are so many limitations. Like I would define Orii as a very beautiful failure. So I think it's a great product that had a great life cycle, but there were a lot of very fundamental flaws about the product that even sat outside manufacturing. So I think one of the most interesting ones that we ended up learning was that the motion of this product, which was to lift your hand to touch your ear to use the product, to be able to hear the conduction that was coming through your finger, was both its greatest benefit as well as its greatest curse. So it made it really convenient to use a product, but it also meant that from a design perspective, you had to commit to emotion to use a product. So you always had to lift your hand to use a product. So it was an antithesis of hands-free. So I think this was something that was both a very interesting and sort of fundamental flaw of the product that both my dad and sort of a lot of the other users that started to use the product started to understand more through repeated use of the product. There are a lot of other things, like obviously from the DFM, which is the design from manufacturing perspective, or from an execution perspective, that were very, very difficult, right? Like the fact that we chose chamfered edges and rounded corners and the way we packaged the device, and we had like 10 rings in a box, and all the tools that we had to create in order to manufacture a product with that level of modularity, yeah, is a nightmare. But I mean, as a product, I think we executed something very, very difficult, which was to create a modular bone conduction voice assistant ring. But its greatest flaws were not in the design process, more in its product framing and the user interface.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like when I tried out the Orii ring, it was actually surprisingly light. I thought it was kind of like it would prevent me from like moving my finger freely, and it actually didn't. And it was actually very intuitive and free to use. So other than like manufacturing limitations, when you pitch to investors or trying to sell your product, what is another difficulty you came across?
Yeah, I think that there are many different kinds of startups. So I would define ourselves as there are certain startups or projects that are more artistic in nature. I would put ourselves as the more artistic type. Essentially, what I mean is that we create products that don't have immediate needs. So our products or what we aim to create are oftentimes behavioral changes. So when you're dealing with a behavioral change product, one of the most difficult things is the ability to be able to describe the product in a short, concise way. So let me give you an example, right? So if I told you a name of a product, let's say smartwatch, right? You know what it does. I don't need to tell you, right? Because it is a predefined category. Now, if you were the first smartwatch, that could be very difficult, right? Now, if I called our product, for example, if I called our original product, or if I called it a smart ring, right? It doesn't define anything. You have almost no clue what is the scope of what this product does, right? And what the core features are. And so it is both the most exciting and the most frustrating part of the product. So it's exciting in the sense that you know that you're creating something new, right? That there's a novelty to it, but it's frustrating in that you are constantly trying to find an easier and easier way to explain what you do without having to get every single person to try your product in order to understand. If every person had to try what you make, it would take years in order to get enough people to understand what you're actually doing.
I just like to ask, because I'm hearing that there were many difficulties in creating this kind of Orii device. What you say was like a general thought process of how you tackle these kind of solutions. Like, for example, how you tackled with with being frustrated about creating a new product, or the tackling of having to trying to make things easier and easier in order to be explained so that more people would understand it intuitively.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of names that people give the structure. A lot of people call it like, design thinking, iterative development. I think it's a very natural process. Like, I wouldn't describe it as a method of doing things, but it's just very practical. So you can imagine, like, if you were lost in a given space, in a given area, and you weren't given any directions in terms of where you're supposed to go, right? The only way that you can do it, the only way that you can figure it out is to do it by testing, right? Which is to walk in a given direction, right? Gather as much information as you can. Then when you sort of hit the wrong thing or go along the wrong path, you have to double back and start again. So there's nothing magical about the design thinking process. I mean, it is just a very, very practical way in order to try to discover something new. So like the alternative is that, I mean, if there was a pre-established path, I don't need design thinking, right? Because I already know what the path is, then I might as well just follow that. So oftentimes I think the struggle is with trying to understand where you need to reinvent the wheel, where you need to use design thinking, and where you just follow the pre-established path. Because there are certain things where you really don't need to think about it that much, because there's already a very standard way to do it.
Well, speaking of, you just talked about how there were difficulties marketing your device because it was such a new innovative device. You wouldn't know what a smart ring is unless you define it. So how would you recommend startups to kind of introduce a new thing to the market and actually gain traction?
So yeah, this is something that I think we learned beyond Orii. So I think our new product is, I think, significantly better positioned to succeed. And I mean, it's still bone conduction related. Actually, you mentioned it a little bit, which is our new product is almost like having a voice in your head. Still a lot of the core fundamental technology with a lot of better understanding in terms of how to be able to reach the right market. So I think the one of the easiest ways to think about it is that you really need to have a very clear market entry strategy. So it sounds really simple, and I think a lot of people talk about it from like a business perspective, but it takes a long time in order to find that right fit. So, and one that is born from experience and understanding, and not one that is conceptual, right? So a lot of people have a very conceptual concept of what a good market entry point is. And you can see when a product's positioning is paper thin versus a product that is very, very well thought out in how it's entering the market. So long story short, I would say that for products that are big behavioral changes, right, it's really important to get people to change those behaviors in a phased way. So it just means that it's not that the end goal is different, right? I mean, obviously, we believe that screen-free computing is not only something for visually impaired people, but something that we will all be using one day, right? We believe that using computers will be as easy as it is speaking to you one day, and that there will be devices to facilitate that, almost like having a computer assistant with you all the time that you can speak to, right? We believe that's the future. Now to get there, right, there are many, many steps, many, many milestones, right, to get people to understand all the pieces of technology that need to come together in order to form an experience that is that magical. Yeah, I mean, a recent example that we've really used internally is like, there's so many products out there that are like that, but like the computer, for example, right? Like the computer was around for decades in a really specified education use before it became something that was personally used in the home, right? And so it needed, and it functioned very well in that space. It made money, it served a purpose, right? But it needed sort of that in order for all the hurdles to personalize the computer, like the processing speed, the cost, the size, right? Before all of those things were solved, so that it got small enough and fast enough and easy to use enough that it became something that could be more personable and more home-based. So yeah, you can't jump the gun and try to shoot for 100 when you can barely walk.
Well, moving on from some of the details and failures and challenges you've met throughout the production and different parts of introducing your product to the market, right? So because we're facing a global pandemic right now, so like COVID-19, and it surely affected a lot of different businesses in a lot of different ways. So for like the Origami Labs or for like the Orii ring, like for your product, like does it affect, like how does it affect your product, or maybe like what new challenges does it pose to your product, or maybe like the whole process of producing, marketing, everything?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of different sides. So I mean, the most apparent one was that sort of pre-COVID, we were running a few things at the same time. So we were still running Orii, and then we were launching our new product, Oflow, and developing at the same time. I think COVID really just asked you to understand that there's a lot of uncertainty in the future, and that you have to be more focused with your resources. So we made a very difficult decision, which is actually to stop manufacturing early this year. So that I think is a very intelligent decision, because it has allowed our new product to now launch in the last couple of months. So just in terms of human resources, even excluding all the money that we would have to put into going through other manufacturing runs for Orii, I think that was an intelligent decision. I think that, yeah, I mean, obviously business is down, things are slowed down, and it's slowing down most types of businesses. But I think the main thing is really just asking yourself all the difficult questions, which is, I think that COVID causes a lot of people to play the blame game, right? Which is to look outside, and it gives people a really good excuse. But I think that failure is always more directly connected to your own internal structure and your own internal thinking and your own internal flaws. So it's just that a crisis exacerbates and magnifies some of these flaws. So yeah, I think that it's important to sort of really take a close look at what we're doing. And I think it's brought more focus to the product than before.
Speaking of COVID, there are obviously a lot of new trends emerging, like everything's going online. But other than the obvious one that is everything is going online, do you see any other trends that are emerging?
You mean other crises?
Yeah, I guess I can phrase it that way.
I mean, I have a very interesting opinion on this. I mean, I think that people don't really change that much. So I know that a lot of people are thinking about how COVID is going to change working culture, working behavior, even sort of running more video conferences like this and things like that. But I think that ultimately there is a status quo that we will return to, which is I think human beings are social creatures, and we need to sort of spend time with each other. And I think completely, unless the virtual world, which Zoom I think is a really poor representation of, no offense to Zoom, unless the virtual world becomes one that is equally as immersive as the real world, then I don't think a predominantly virtual world will be the main way that we interact with each other. So yeah, I think that there will be a period of uncertainty, a period of more virtualness, but eventually we'll just go back to the status quo, which is you'll still go out to eat, you'll still want to watch a movie in a movie theater, right? You'll still want to go on a vacation, you still want to do all these things, you still want to go out of the office, you'll still want to hang out with people. These are all just based human needs, and none of that will change. So I guess the trend that I believe in is in the continuity of human nature.
So moving on from some more business-oriented questions, we're moving on to some still business-related, right? But more of a bigger picture. So we know that Origami Labs is based in both Hong Kong and Taiwan. So how would you comment the entrepreneurship or startup scene in Hong Kong?
Yeah, so I'd say the startup scene both in Hong Kong and Taiwan are pretty young. So just in terms of how far people have gotten so far. So if you think about the startup journey as sort of inception to however many series you go through, the C, the A, the B, and some form of exit. There have been exits in both regions, but nothing that is really significant in terms of like a unicorn that has solidified into some sort of tangible value. So I think that if you are sort of working backwards from that, there are a very sort of, sometimes you can almost put it as like a paltry number of Series B, Series A companies, almost you can count them on your hand. So I think the ecosystem as a whole really is very bottom heavy. So there are a lot of startups that are starting, but not a lot of people that have made it to this promised land. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting time. Really, it hasn't really been that long, both the Hong Kong and the Taiwan ecosystem. So, whoever's in this journey right now has an opportunity to sort of set precedent for everyone else that's coming behind.
Of course, Kevin, you mentioned that the startup scene here in Hong Kong and Taiwan is relatively young. Would you say that compared to other more mature scenes over in the EU, US, would you say that there are more barriers here that could potentially limit the scene, in fact, compared to other places?
Yeah, so barriers is a tough question. So there are definitely barriers. So barriers in the sense that the terrain is rougher, there's less infrastructure, the road is less paved, it's more difficult, I guess. But then the flip side is that I think that oftentimes, I mean, as entrepreneurs, we see difficulties as opportunities. So it's like, you think of it as like, I mean, if you had a tough childhood, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be successful, right? Actually, in many ways, it could make you more successful, right? Because it helps sort of train your mentality. So I think that it's a very difficult balance. So there will definitely be more startups that fail because the infrastructure is not there. But the ones that can survive will be amazing. So I think oftentimes people forget that, the Valley or in the EU, that so many of these great startups that came out first also came out in a world where there was nothing, right? Where it was just basically rubble. Yeah, I think I can't say that I can't say that because of those pain points and because of those problems they succeeded, but they succeeded in despite of a lot of the problems that they faced, which I think created really colorful and sort of interesting companies.
I want to circle back to the idea of entrepreneurial ecosystem, as you've mentioned, paving the road for the next generation. And I want to ask, like, what is your view on whether we're doing enough to promote entrepreneurship amongst teenagers like us?
Yeah, I think that it's really about, so entrepreneurship is a movement. It's like a philosophy. So it's a very fuzzy thing. So like a really good example is that entrepreneurship or being a startup is such a poorly defined thing. So when are you a startup, when you're not a startup? When are you an SME and when you are not? Like if I open up a bubble tea store, does it make me a startup? Like how tech do I need to be able to be a startup, right? So it's very confusing. Like, okay, you say like, oh, to be a startup means like you have to grow really fast. Well, I can grow my bubble tea store really fast, and does that make me a startup? So it's like, yeah, it's such a fuzzy concept. So in a similar way, I think that as a movement, it's also equally as fuzzy. So oftentimes some of our efforts to push something end up doing nothing because it's such a amorphous thing. So personally, I think that entrepreneurship, one of the cores of entrepreneurship is about illogical belief. So it's about thinking that you can do something, even when at this moment you cannot. And so that's why I talked a little bit about precedence, which is the easiest way for that to happen is if there are people who have done it. And if there are people who have done it, then I think that is the greatest way to encourage younger entrepreneurs. So I think where we're at right now is that no one has done it, but some people have gotten close. And so that's inspiring enough for someone to try to give it a try, essentially. So yeah, it's like no one has even completed the race yet, but someone has tried and gotten very close. It requires whoever gets into the race now are people that need to be, that don't need the validation of someone having completed it.
What would be the one tip that you would give your 17-year-old self you can talk to your past self in terms of entrepreneurship?
Yes, so I would give myself no advice. And primarily, I would even just not talk to myself. And I think, I think I am a believer in the opposite of the multiverse. So I'm a believer in a single universe theory, essentially that, everything consolidates around one singular thing, and anything and everything that will happen is just a very complicated mathematical equation that can be calculated. So just that from a matter of perspective, your current movement and trajectory is unknown to yourself. So in a way, I think speaking to myself is a pointless exercise because if I did, then I would have already. So I have already spoken to myself if I will speak to myself.
That is a very, very interesting outlook, especially because of the single theory. You talked about a mathematical equation. As a personal question, I would like to know that if you think that Orii as a startup was similar to like a mathematical equation that turned out to be very wonderful in your favor, and would you say that like how you maybe have cracked the code in this case?
Yeah, I would say that Ori is like a very beautiful failed equation. It's like something like a really interesting structured equation where when you did the proof, it didn't work out, right? Where when you're cross-checking things, there's something in there that was wrong. But I think what Ori allowed us to realize is that there was something there. So there's a code there that wasn't completely cracked, which is, I think, why we're at it a second time, sort of taking everything that we've learned, taking all the parts of the equation that worked, right, and trying to tweak and modify things to try to crack that same code. Yeah, that's the easiest way I would describe Ori. So I think it's a very interesting part of the process. Like, it ended up becoming, Ori was not the destination. It was only just a milestone to a different destination.
Well, you talked about milestones. Well, for your company, maybe like beyond Ori, right? And I remember just now when we asked about the past, you prefer not to like give your past self. Well, you don't believe in a past self advice, but looking into the future, well, where do you see yourself? Where do you see Origami Labs? Where do you see the projects you've been doing? You and your team have been working on.
Yeah, I would say that we are turning a corner. So I'm very positive about what we're doing. I think that we're entering very unprecedented territory. Our new product, I think, from a form is the better form, better features. We have a much stronger understanding of our own core motivations. So yeah, I'm really excited for what's ahead, and pretty sure that we will be able to cross the next milestone. I think the more curious thing to me is that you sort of more and more as you go along this entrepreneurship journey, you realize how high of a mountain you're actually trying to ascend, right? And so I think that, yeah, I have a lot of confidence in being able to cross the next milestone. But the next beyond that, and the next beyond that, and the next beyond that, I'm not sure, right? I don't know if I will be someone that will reach the summit, or if I'll be another corpse on its slope. But I find that fascinating. So at the very least, I think I will want to try to take what we're working on as far as I can. And the only reason why I think what other people will see us and see what we're doing as a success, I think only I will define it as a failure, because only I know where I want it to go.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely define your business as a success. So, are there any role models that you look to, or any philosophy you keep to heart to keep your business running far into the future?
Yeah, there are a lot. I think there's a very lesser known philosophy that's called the third horizon that I'm a big believer in. So basically, it's broken down into that creative work is oftentimes separated into three horizons. The first horizon is usually things that have very immediate needs, almost commodities. The second horizon are modification of existing things, so things that you need tomorrow. And third horizon things are things that we don't know that we need yet. So I think this third horizon is the conceptual frontier that we are trying to pursue, which is my purpose for creating these products. Ultimately, is the desire to contribute to the creative infrastructure of mankind itself. So I have no interest in replicating something, or no interest in refining something. I think everything that I create is a desire to get 1 extra inch of creativity. We're not there yet. So, I think we are still very much in the realm of improving existing things and building things for tomorrow, and not yet at the point where like you have actually created something that is entirely novel. So yeah, I think philosophically there's that. A lot of my role models are really weird ones. I would say a lot of my role models are dead artists. Yeah, like Picasso or Monet or Renoir or like music composers. Yeah, like Mahler or Beethoven or yeah. And I think the reason why is because I think that I see a lot of science in what they do, sort of a lot of rhyme, reason, structure, and methodology to the seemingly maddening result. And I think that personally, I think that sort of what they've created, they're sort of like almost like classical entrepreneurs in a sense, right? And so I think, yeah, just being really true to your own art and trying to sort of discover a process of self-discovery of the story that you're trying to tell is something that I think is really interesting. And sort of if you're looking at a lot of these people, they spend a lifetime trying to discover that melody or that painting. So yeah, it's fascinating. Like, Ooh, hello. Yes. So yeah, it's fascinating. It's like if you think about yeah, like Van Gogh, I think so many people assume that what he does is on a whim, right? Only for you to sort of discover that a lot of these things that he painted hundreds of times, right? It's seemingly abstract, but it's not, right? It is merely abstract in its imagery, but meticulously crafted sort of iteratively. And I think that's like a good way to sort of look at a lot of how we approach what we're doing.
Would you say that, I mean, obviously you've talked about how these old classic entrepreneurs have been going through such hard work, such persistence in order to create these great objects and these great arts that we enjoy nowadays. Would you say that these artists would actually have contributed to a third horizon that you've talked about, mainly the horizon of not knowing what we need as a whole in order to start up?
Yeah, entirely. I mean, I think like at the time, it's so interesting because there were so many, technically, I mean, in hindsight, there are discovered things now, right? But at the time, there were so many undiscovered things. I mean, there are a lot of undiscovered things now. It's just not everyone can see them. Just like back then, they thought that there were no undiscovered things. So, like even simple things like so many of these artists were scientists, like in the way that they saw and understood light, right? And the fluid sciences, right? And trying to uncover like how water flowed and water, or concepts of time, like, Picasso exploring mathematical realities to, to Van Gogh trying to understand the concepts of perception and how we see colors, right? There's so many interesting things, right? Where painting and art was really just the medium, right? What they were trying to tackle was actually a very fundamental problem that helped us understand a little bit more about the world. So yeah, I mean, I think equal frontiers exist today. Like we like to always think that everything is already discovered, but it's not. right? There's equivalent amounts of unknown. It's just whether or not we are, or you as a person can be aware of it.
So of course I'm a student, and I think the one big problem in Hong Kong is that during the pandemic we couldn't get any tutors, and tutors couldn't get any students. So I created a platform called greatcare.co with my friends, and which is like kind of like a Tinder for students and tutors. And basically you go on the website, you can like choose different tutors, and tutors can accept different students, like a Uber ride or Tinder match. And I just want to ask you, as a good idea or not, and any advice you would give?
Yeah, it sounds like there is a rudimentary need for it, I think. So I think as a concept, it's interesting. I think that ultimately it's less important about what the idea is and more about why you want to create it. So this is very, very important. So I think like I think especially to students, my main advice is to think more about founder market fit rather than product market fit. So the more that you understand yourself, that's what you should be focused on. So if you understand yourself and you understand why, right? Why you are doing what you're doing, or why you're pursuing what you're pursuing, right? Then you will do something really great. So for example, like I remember one of the questions that you guys had was how to give a 60-second pitch, right? The 60-second pitch is not about what you're doing, because let's say I told you what I was doing, right? To most people, it sounds very opportunistic, right? Yeah. If I say there's this problem and then I'm going to fill this gap, and so it's like a very salesy. So what people actually want to know is they want to know sort of why, right? Why is it that you want to create this thing? Not that there's a need for this thing, if that makes any sense. So for example, right, like, so like this, let's say this opportunity that you've outlined, it is true, I'm sure, right? Like that there's a difficulty with matching these two parties, and that a platform could be the solution for it, right? But then the more fundamental question is this something that you care about deeply enough to create it, right? And is this something that is like not everyone does a startup to pursue a life purpose, right? But is this aligned with you on some fundamental level?
Well, right? Yeah, I would say yes, because I have some friends from local school who can't afford textbooks, and so we're IB students, and we have a thing called CAS, which is creativity, activity, and service. So I was hoping that before it's actually on the market, we will use it for students who want to give back to the community, to provide free tutor sessions to those local students who are in need of actual education, to kind of solve this educational inequality. That is one of the motives.
Yeah, then I think it's good, right? And then, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of specific things that I could ask, like I could outline some of the weaknesses of a platform play. Platform plays are each type of business has a lot of its own complexities. So, platform plays are oftentimes about have very difficult time to scale, because either they work, which is that they've reached a critical mass of both suppliers, supply and demand, which is, in your case, you need enough students on the platform and you need enough tutors on the platform. And then you need to have enough sustained input of new tutors, and you also need to have enough sustained input of new students. of which if the equilibrium breaks on either side, the platform will break.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, but none of that is important unless it reaches a critical mass that it makes it useful. Right. So oftentimes platforms are really difficult to scale because of how difficult they are to launch. Right. So for example, a really good example is, let's say, I'm just playing off the cuff here. Right. So I like to think about new ideas. So for example, let's say you want to launch something like this, then in my opinion, it would have to launch big first. So it would have to be, this is something that's very difficult to do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It needs to go from 0 to 10.
Okay.
Because in its state of 1, 2, 3, it's pretty useless. So it needs to get to 10 first. So then it's thinking about, okay, so how do you get to 10 quickly? I don't know. Like, it could be that you tell a lot of people about it in the most traditional way. You would tell a lot of people about it. You get a lot of people signed up, but you don't launch the service. And then you have an announcement of the service that you launch at a given point in time. And you have a target number of students and a target number of tutors that will be available on day one.
Yes.
Right. So this is the most traditional way, but extremely difficult. So, it means that you have to go out there and campaign and talk to people, get people signed up, get people excited, build an email list, or create a group, continue to message them, right? Keep the leads warm, and then finally announce that the thing is on, and then 100% of the out of the 100 people you reached out to, like, you'll get 10 people to come back, right? And then hopefully you reached out to like 50,000 people, and then maybe you get like a couple of thousand people coming back, and then that's great. And then you built enough momentum that this thing has some legs, something like that, right? That's one of the most difficult things about a platform play. So you can think of the reverse. Like, if you haven't reached critical mass on a platform, no one is going to, so people that first use your platform will not recommend your platform because it doesn't work.
Right. I see what you mean.
Right? Because so there is no build up. That's why platforms are so hard, right? Because if I go on and there's nothing, or I don't make a good match, or I don't do what, then it's very, very difficult. So the other way is like a sanctioned play, which is like to piggyback on someone else's network. Maybe there's some sort of parent teachers association, or to get sponsorship from a school, or for it to be validated as like a system that can be pushed out. Right, so that you can push out your system through different networks all at once. That could help you sort of reach more people more quickly. So that is another way, which is to be a approved instrument, right? So instead of you can think of that as like going from the bottom up and then going from the top down.
Yeah, I actually thought about that, and in a grade 11, we actually have student councils and each different school. So I was thinking about if we use student council as a way to kind of reach down to many different, like almost all schools. Do you think that would be a good way?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, like, it's difficult to say. So I mean, you would have to hold some of these conversations, and then I think having these conversations, you would learn more. So like, if you have a conversation and then they tell you to, okay, see, the risk is, I think sometimes with entrepreneurship, you think that you have unlimited bullets. Right. So what you do have to realize is that you have to be careful about your ammunition. So think of speaking to a person as a bullet. Right. So you can only speak to a person a certain number of times before they lose confidence in you.
Right. Yeah.
Right. This is sort of like networking 101. So you can think about it as like, if you speak to someone that's important, like a key network person, right? you need to know how important they are to your overall strategy so that you know how mature what you're creating is, right? To know if you are burning an opportunity or not. And if you're burning that opportunity at the right time. So yeah, part of what's so difficult about entrepreneurship is that it requires so much nuanced experience on many different levels. Right. Like this is such a, like networking tidbit, it's so subtle.
Yeah.
Right. It's so subtle, but it's really, really important. Right. So, oftentimes it's not necessarily about the network, but networking in the right sequence. Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, I mean, the other way to do it is, the other way to think about it, I think, is also like, it's also really to understand or to think about is really to understand your own scale, which is why I think it's so, it's really important to understand your own personal motivation. So for example, like doing a lot of A/B testing to understand if it fulfills your core values, right? So let's say you go opposite and let's say you got rid of the platform, right? Let's say that you were able to find you're a really well-networked person, you have a lot of friends, right? You're able to find like 50 really great tutors, right? And then you were able to line those people up with 50 students that you felt had like a lot of really great potential, right? And then there's a very small curated experience, but you really made a really big impact and difference in these 50 students' lives, right? They got into great schools, they built like this really great relationship. Think of it as like, I mean, so many times we think of products as a solution, but sometimes, for example, the solution is like a strong alumni association, for example, right? Let's say, right, which is a very traditional tool. But then the problem is that the alumni network is weak, right? That's like another angle per se, right? So, I mean, this power difference and broken dynamic between student and mentor exists across all parts of society, right? Not just in the student realm, right? But in the working realm, in the university realm, right? Because of human nature, right? Which is that people who get very far rarely want to contribute backwards. Is that problem solvable? Not in the traditional startup sense.
Yeah.
Right? It's a much more fundamental societal problem, which I would say that is the main problem, right? The main problem is the reason why they can't find the right caregiver is because the people who should be helping to find the caregivers aren't more involved.
Yeah.
Right? So by making the caregivers easier to find is not really going to solve the process because the elderly person is not going to be using the platform in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? So what is the platform for? And who is it for? Right? Is making the platform easier to do going to make the child want to take care of the elderly person more?
Not.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not saying it's unsolvable, right? Like maybe there's something deeper there that is solvable, right? But yes, it's about understanding what the true core problem is. Yes, which oftentimes is more complex than we initially realize. So I think that's this is why your own personal belief is so important, because your personal belief is what will keep you moving forwards when you continuously get this problem statement wrong.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah.
So you will get it wrong time and time again. But if you were there because of the opportunity, then the first time that the opportunity closes, you will quit. When you realize that your thesis is wrong, right, you won't do it anymore because it's not true.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But that's the thing. Most theses are proven wrong very quickly. Right? Either that, or it takes someone a very long time to realize that thesis is wrong, which is even a worse kind of startup.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's why the core motivation is so important, because it helps you sort of pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and then give it another go at a different angle, right? So if someone really cared about this thing, they would do every way possible to get there, and not be committed to, not necessarily be enamored with one way in which they want to achieve it. That's why the goal is so important.
Right.
How would you say that, like, obviously, like, we talked about core motivation, but I found it very interesting that there's also this core problem that we have to discover. How would one, do you think, how would one be able to peel this layer of onion better, in this case by removing this surface layer of problem that we see very clearly, which is obvious, and to delve deeper into this kind of main issue, which is global issue that we have?
This is a tough question. It's insight. Yeah, it's everyone does it differently. This answer I can't explain to you, because everyone solves problems in a different way. So for example, for myself, I am someone that absorbs a ridiculous amount of information. So I absorb all kinds of things, right? Like when I was younger, like I read entire shelves of books, like the entire 500 to 700 Dewey Decimal System, just everything. And I've started to understand more what kind of thinker I am. And so I'm what you call a pattern recognizer. So I can think of something by looking at something else. So for example, let's say I'm watching a movie. I'm not actually watching the movie, I'm looking for patterns. And from watching a piece of entertainment, I can get an idea about something else that I've been thinking about. So if I were going to answer your question for myself, the way I would dive deeper into a problem and to peel the onion is to digest different kinds of mediums, right? Which is to look at it from many different angles, to like read a nonfiction book, to speak to people, to do whatever, right? And then I take this very broad, almost non-relevant approach. And then that helps me get some inspiration or angle on something. But that's the type of thinker that I am, right? Which is a very different type than most. So that's why I said it goes back to understanding yourself. So that method that I just told you, I've told to many people, and I've never met anyone that it works for.
Right. Yeah. Have you heard about how Elon Musk, there's a principle that Elon Musk invented, and which is like, for example, he was talking about car batteries, and the way he broke it down was, okay, in a battery you have like electrodes, and then deeper than that you have electrons and how they work, and he kind of breaks it down in a very fundamental way, while you take kind of like a more macroscopic way, kind of like a mosaic, a bit of everything, and you combine it together.
Yeah. So I think it's more about understanding your own thought process.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So if you understand your own thought process, you will know what triggers new ideas. And so I think that is probably my easiest answer. So like the easier analogy would be that not everyone studies in the same way.
Yeah.
Right. So actually, I think that's probably one of the downsides of education, which is that, people try to get you to study in the same way when everyone's minds operate a little bit differently.
Yeah, I know, right?
So I think, yeah, it's about understanding sort of how you think. Then it helps you optimize the situations in where you will come up with the answers.
Wow.
You're increasing the probability in which you will find the answer.
Yeah, I think that's a very profound and interesting answer because, like, other people I've talked to, they just kind of like give one solution and they think that is kind of, the solution that you should use and that kind of works for everyone. Whereas you kind of, analyze the situation. I really like that. And I think not to disturb you anymore. We've like talked for like an hour and a half, so we'll just wrap it up and take a photo and rest.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
I'm so sorry, Kevin, but thank you so much. That was such an interesting outlook, and I think that made me gain so much more than what I was expecting at first.
Yeah, same as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys.